Have you ever thought of yoga as being satanic? Well, if you haven't, and I certainly haven't, it seems that there are plenty of people who do. There are people who think that yoga and asanas are of the devil. Let's start with the pastor of a megachurch in the United States who preaches to his congregation that yoga, with all its contortions called asanas, is evil because Hinduism is demonic. Then there's a Catholic priest in North Ireland who's on record to have said, if you do yoga, you're headed for the kingdom of darkness and will soon be drawn towards Satan and the fallen angels. There was quite an uproar to the priest's views from the local Hindu community, who asked the Pope to discipline the priest. Nothing has come of that yet. And perhaps it's because the Vatican's chief exorcist holds a similar view. He told the London Telegraph that doing yoga leads to a belief in Hinduism and that all Eastern religions are based on a false belief of reincarnation. Now, the father concluded by saying, practicing yoga is satanic, it leads to evil, just like reading Harry Potter. Wow. I'm not a fan of Harry Potter, so I may be spared some of the torments of hell, but I am a practitioner of yoga, and as a Bhakti yogi, I'm also identified as being a Hindu. But I still feel safe from going to hell because upon receiving a Bhagavad Gita, Pope John Paul II had said, I understand something about the deep spiritual concepts which are upheld in India, and I appreciate them. I've heard about Krishna, and Krishna is great.
Hello and welcome to Andrews Clubhouse. I hope you're well. It is Sunday, the 16th of March at 8:35 p.m. and it is a blimey hot day, hot evening. It is still around 28 degrees at 8:30 p.m. here in Australia in the Southern Hemisphere. And I'm feeling exhausted, I'm feeling tired. I am struggling with depression, but it's okay, I'll get over it. I'm on my meds and I stopped smoking cannabis, prescription cannabis, mind you, because firstly I needed to give up something big for Lent this year, and it got to a point where I realized that it was more harm than good, right? Where last year I was struggling with intense mania and a nervous breakdown, and my mind was just racing, and cannabis just calmed me down. But when I got over those symptoms and stuff in my head started to calm down, I started to feel the more kind of like negative impacts of cannabis, which is just overly dull, right? Overly just, too much, right? And I need to be sharp, right, moving forward in this beautiful new year, 2025. So I felt that Lent was a great time to give it up. And I have, and I feel great generally, but because I'm bipolar, right, and that's what I understand about myself now, my emotions are highly irregular, you know, so perhaps I'd wake up with a spring in my step, but within hours, I'm just in a funk, and I don't know why, just laying down on the couch, you know, getting all depressed, feeling like my body weighs a ton, and then just constantly trying to sort of push myself to motivate myself, right? And it's hard to find that motivation, you know, but, you know, no excuses, right? If I have something planned that day, I have to do it, you know? I have to push forward into the future, restructure my life and repair the damage that I did last year to myself, to my family, to my wife, to my kids, to my finances, you know what I mean? To my reputation, to my business, to my friends, and the friendships that I had, right? That's the plan moving forward in this balmy new year, right? I want to start by talking about this YouTube channel and why it's important for me to keep it going, for many, many reasons. Eventually, I'm going to use it, I'm going to experiment with using it as a platform to promote other businesses and other ideas, right, and other people, right, and experiment with that to see how that goes, whether I can sort of gain some traction from that, because I think what I'm doing is quite important or has the potential to be beneficial to other people. And I often think that, you know, it's just this silly little game that I'm playing that has no real benefit. And then I get emails from people out of the blue. And I think to myself, wow, that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have this YouTube channel. And so it sort of spurs me on to keep going, to understand that this is a worthwhile platform that I'm building, and this is a worthwhile thing that I'm doing, and it gives me a bunch of joy, and I really, really love it, right? It helps give me that motivation, right? It helps me in my recovery journey and process, right? It helps build up my confidence in myself, right? And in my ability to create something worthwhile and to talk well about things that I care about, to show people my heart and my mind and who I actually am. It's quite lovely, right? And the person that reached out to me was a good friend of my father back in the 80s, before I was born, right? Who was able to reveal to me a side of my father that I didn't know existed. This different sort of intimate kind of perspective, but also it shone a light on a lot of the issues that I've been kind of dealing with, right? And so her name's Michelle, and she's amazing and she's lovely, and I went and met her at Bronte Beach, right? Which is really fitting, because I think Bronte Beach might be one of my favorite beaches ever. It's where our family used to go back in the day. Lebos, you know, were uncomfortable with going to Bondi. You know, why do you want me to go to Bondi? Nah, man, Bondi, they're all stupid there. We go to Bronte. I think we like Bronte because it had like a beautiful kind of like grass area, right? And Lebos used to like sort of pitching up with their barbecues. I have really, really fond memories of beach trips in Bronte with my aunts and uncles, you know, before the trauma really, really took hold of me and my family, my mum and my father. She knew, I met her there, and we had this long talk, I think like 2 hours or something, on this beautiful platform, right, overlooking the water. Amazing, you know. She was my dad's friend back in the day, right? She knew my father for 2 years, and she told me that she adored my father, and he was a big shot, right? She's writing a book about her family's involvement in the underbelly of Sydney, right? Her background's Italian, and her family came here, I believe, in 1890, and they became involved in the underbelly, right? And I don't want to get into specifics, and it's not my story, but because of that, her family ended up interacting with my father back in the 80s. And yeah, she told me that she had a really, really good relationship with my father. He was really, really, really good to her. He was inquisitive and asked her a lot of questions, like me, right? He was a big shot, and she was sort of like, she admired him, right? She looked at him with sort of rose-tinted glasses because he was this really wealthy, well-to-do guy. He was a big player, kind of like a Pablo Escobar figure. And he owned BEIRUT by Night back in the day. Now, BEIRUT by Night, apparently, I don't know, used to be like a big kind of nightclub, right? The biggest nightclub in Sydney. And I used to hear people sort of saying, perhaps my father boasting about the fact that Kylie Minogue used to frequent the nightclub BEIRUT by night, which was owned by my father and his best friends. And, you know, I found that really interesting. And she said that my father, you know, used to always dress really, really well. He used to wear suits and all that sort of stuff. And he'd give her son, at the time, well, he's still a son, when he was 7 or 9 years old, or thereabouts, crisp $100 bills as gifts, you know? Kind of like get out of his pocket. Which I found so interesting, because the only other person that I know to do that is my mum's current partner, boyfriend, right? He goes to restaurants, right? He's the type of guy to go to restaurants and sort of like, you know, tip the waiters $50, $100, $200, right? But not just subtly, he'd make a big show of it, right? And I found that really interesting, because my mother despises my father, but she goes out with people that are like him, which I found really interesting. And the impression that I get from her is that my mother and father's marriage was just a loveless, arranged marriage. Neither of them really knew each other. Neither of them really like loved each other, right? They were just doing it because, well, my father gave this girl the impression that he only married my mum because he felt that he had to fulfill his, call it cultural obligation, right? His religious familial obligation. But he didn't really love my mum, right? Which, you know, doesn't surprise me, because he never treated her well, for goodness sakes. And I had this eureka moment when she told me this, because I realized that my mother became the partner of her current partner while he was still married to his previous wife, because he was married to her because of, you know, his own sort of familial and cultural obligation, but didn't really love her, right? But fell in love with my mum, right? So she literally became her. My mum became Michelle, right? Michelle's the name of the girl. I don't know if I mentioned that, the woman that reached out to me. And I found that so interesting, because I realized last year that I was trapped repeating these generational sort of traumatic events or behaviors, right? That my mum was the recipient of a loveless marriage, which led to her being the recipient of domestic violence, right? You know, you don't hurt the people that you love, and my father obviously didn't love her, right? And domestic violence and beating women and children was just normalised, right, within our Lebanese Maronite culture, right? I found that fascinating, you know? And more than that, right, if I really want to dissect, right, and go deeper into, you know, the cultural sort of hypocrisy of what happened, right, for my father to marry someone that he didn't love and he didn't really want to marry, right, create like a sacrament, because marriage is a sacrament, right? I learned that from marriage class at Our Lady of Lebanon, right? Well, that's a sin, for goodness sakes, right? If your heart's not in it, right, it's disrespectful to that sacrament, right? I was living a sin, right? My family, my mother and father were living in sin. And my mother, the hypocrite, right, fell into the same trap, for goodness sakes, right, with her other partner. Her other partner sort of lived in sin, right, lived in a loveless sort of marriage, right, and then needed to get his rocks off with... needed to find love somewhere else and found that in my mum, let's just say, you know. And the damage that was caused to the children is that we're the recipients of a loveless marriage and a accursed sacrament, right? Accursed sacrament, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that, right? That we're all trapped in this sort of, you know, generational sort of trauma, this chain, right? And my Uncle Charlie is as well, because what did she tell me? Is that she remembers one of his brothers who was going to high school, right? At the time, my father would put bricks of heroin in his school bag, right? And that sounded like a story that my Uncle Charlie used to complain about, right? Being forced to deal drugs, basically, right? And my Uncle Charlie still holds a grudge against my father for that, right? That what we're living in now is the wrongs that my father sort of lived through, right? The repercussions of the actions that my father made all those decades ago, right? Because although this particular person, my dad's friend back in the day, has this, you know, really kind of like rose-tinted view of my father, I don't, right? Because by the time I was born, my father was in jail, right? Michelle was still seeing my father around the time that I think the court proceedings had started, and there was a rumor, right, that I think it's worthwhile for me to clarify. There was a rumor that my father bribed the Supreme Court judge, right, and then that didn't work, and then, you know, he ultimately went to jail, and she asked my father about that, and then he said straight away, nope, that's false, it wasn't me that did that. Someone did that, but it wasn't my father. So don't spread the rumor that my dad bribed a Supreme Court judge, because he didn't. He wouldn't do that. He only developed a substantial addiction to heroin after he was incarcerated. And I had to live through that, right? That was the early childhood that I had to sort of suffer through. A father that was always asleep, a father that didn't work, a father that was on Centrelink, and a father that was struggling and trudging and failing, all right, to get over his addiction to heroin, right? There's this image of my father detoxing that I've used in thumbnails and all that sort of stuff, right? But what's really, really, really interesting is that it is very, very, very similar to a photo, a Polaroid photo that my eldest son Theo took of me when I was struggling with detoxing from alcohol, right? And that really hit home to me, finding those photos of my father and then remembering that Polaroid, right? And the photo of me on the couch, right, struggling, that was months after I stopped drinking alcohol, but in order to cope, I sort of was leaning harder on my ADHD medication, which was dexamphetamines, which is amphetamines, right? Ice, pretty much, right? I was on like 6 to 8 a day, and I was intermixing that with Valium and just a whole bunch of other stuff, and it was wrecking my brain, right? And it turns out that concoction of medication was like the worst thing that you could have given to me because of my bipolar disorder, right? Because ceasing alcohol meant that like my brain had to try to go back to its equilibrium naturally, right? Just a normal sort of just calm state. But because become so accustomed, my brain becomes so accustomed to alcohol, it just struggled, man. And I struggled to sort of find that equilibrium, let's just say, right? It was a rough road that I'm still recovering from, for goodness sakes, because I went about it the wrong way. I quit cold turkey. I leaned on other drugs, which were basically amphetamines and benzodiazepine, and oh my God, antidepressants and all this sort of stuff. And it just, you know, wreaked havoc on my brain. And I struggled, man. I struggled. I you know, was bound to the couch, just vertigo, nausea, headaches, migraines. Oh God, it was really, really, really rough. My kids, you know, saw that, and my wife, you know, protected them from that, contextualized it, and I contextualized it, you know, daddy's tired, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it didn't really impact them as negatively as me seeing, you know, my father basically blind for a period of my childhood, right? Because for me, there was a lead up to it. There was, you know, violent episode after violent episode after violent episode. And then all of a sudden, you know, he's hospitalized, right? And then we're supposed to have sympathy for him, and that just confused me. The roller coaster ride that my father sort of took us on, rich to poor, to rich, to happy, to sad, to excited, giddy, then angry, then abusive, and just constantly, right? You know, energetic, then asleep, right? It's just crazy, right? And I had to deal with that as an adult. That's partly why I have so much animus towards, like, frustrations towards my father, because he's so inconsistent, right? I'd speak to him on the phone, and he'd be great, fine, happy. How you going, son? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'll help you, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, he'd call like a week later or 2 weeks later, flip the script. Hey, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? No, I'm not going to give you anything. Blah, 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 blah. And then next time, oh, hey, Andrew, how are you? And just fucking Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know what I mean? And for me, I have such an aversion to that irregularity, right? It's the same thing that I found in my Uncle Charlie and my Uncle Tony. Dysregulation is, you know, a prominent thing in my family. My Uncle Zulzul, right? Yeah, man. And as someone that's gone through, it's been traumatized by seeing someone go through that, like, I just have an aversion to it. Yeah, I can't stand it, man. It makes me nauseous, right? And then you have people in my family that refuse to forgive, right? Because I genuinely tried to forgive my father, and I thought that I did. And then what happened last year and the year before made me realize that I really hadn't forgiven him. And if I really, really, really want to forgive him, then I really, really have to sort of work harder at myself in understanding my father and understanding myself, right? Yeah. But then you have other people in my family that just don't really understand the importance of forgiveness. Like my Uncle Charlie, who still bears a huge grudge towards my father, and it's palpable and so evident, and it's so toxic, because he's at a point where I believe he's far worse than my dad, right? Seeing how my Uncle Charlie still talks about my father, about heroin addiction and heroin this and heroin that, right? And yeah, I just find that so interesting. Because with what happened last year, we had so much finances involved in, like, the family trust, and it was so important for the family to sort of put their issues aside, right, and to work together to kind of, like, resolve the financial issues, right, that arose because I had a nervous breakdown and I couldn't sort of, like, I wasn't in any position to help them, right? So they just had to figure it out themselves, and they had to be honest and open to each other, and they just weren't, right? Because they despise each other, and they're all liars, right? And crooks, right? And unethical people. So what resulted was basically the worst case scenario imaginable, you know what I mean? The loan that had to be repaid got like hundreds of thousands got added. Actually, 1.6 million. I'd say 1 or 200,000 would be paid to the loan. Somewhere close to 2 million that had to be repaid. Yeah, and it didn't matter because they weren't ever going to repay the loan for the house. They were just going to let the house go to auction. And my Uncle Charlie ended up going to a silent auction and purchasing the house that he was the beneficiary to, because they couldn't just come together and sort of like resolve the issue themselves, right? And just, oh God, be nice to the lenders. Man, and the house that we purchased for 1.9 million in Penrith was sold for like 1.5 or something, maybe 1.3. Extraordinary, like way lower than what we purchased it for, because they were just desperate to offload it because they just were angry at me and then just didn't want anything to do with me and didn't want to talk to me and then just wanted to like rush and just push to get the job, to get the property sold. So in desperation, they just took whatever they can get and didn't sort of have the patience and couldn't go to the bank and just ask them for more time. Because private lenders, you know, you could talk to them. They're just like you and me. It's like, hey, cuz the guy that got the loan had a nervous breakdown and we're panicking. Can you just give us more time? But it just wasn't like that. It was just, they were just angry at the phone and they were lying to the lenders, man. They were just making all these horrid excuses, thinking that they're smart businessmen. Yeah, man. If they would just, you know, forgive themselves or be the people that they thought that they were, which was like good Christians that love their brother and sister and neighbor, they would have been able to navigate through it and the result would have been a lot better for them. But yeah, man, it just wasn't, right? And now I hear that my Uncle Charlie has taken to being responsible for the family assets again, even though my uncle, the eldest son, is the director and it's his responsibility. He's been calling his two sisters that live in the last property that's owned by the estate. And there's a huge debt on that. He's been harassing them and abusing them and stressing them out and forcing them to pay more rent rather than just selling the house, right? And just giving them the money, perhaps letting them live in his house up the road that he purchased from funds from the family estate, let them rent out that house and sell this house that they're living in. You know, that would make way more sense. And then with the money left over from the sale of that house, they could just split it between the beneficiaries, right? And then no harm, no foul, everything's fine, right? But they won't even sort of entertain that because their heart is so full of like hatred towards each other. And it's this really toxic kind of competition. So, yeah, man. And it all stems from the grudge that my Uncle Charlie has towards my father for putting heroin bricks in his school bag when he was in high school, right? Man, ugh. And mind you, my Uncle Charlie, the most immoral and unethical and hate-filled person that I know,
my brother was a heroin addict.
Company
For over 22 years in and out of jail.
sponsors
That's Andrews father.
Maronites on mission, right? Because he thinks that by doing that, actually, you know what? Good on him for sponsoring a charity, right? Better for him to sponsor the charity for $10,000 than to spend $10,000 on heroin bricks in it, right? I got to give him that, right? Because I was thinking about it before, and it makes sense, isn't it? Right? It's a good way for you to, you know, move that kind of money to something more positive, right? Because Maronites on Mission I genuinely respect. I think that they're great. I think partly because they reach outside of the Maronite community and they help people, they reach out and help people outside of the Maronite community, which I think is amazing. Because part of the issue that I have with the Maronite community is that they're very, very, very narrow-minded. They're very, very, what's the word? Sort of like, locked into their own culture. They only care about their perspective and their views in helping
Can't recall whether there's an order of the court that says that you
their
can't
people,
threaten or
I
arrest
suppose, in a way. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I think that a Maronite's ability to engage with other cultures and people and other ways of life is a good and positive thing, right? But it's so interesting because you also get a sense of superiority, right, and bigotry. Because my uncle, who actually went on a mission with Maronites on mission to some third world country, I'm not too sure where it was. Perhaps it was somewhere in Southeast Asia, and they were building houses, missions, schools and houses and whatever, which is great, and I love it, and I think it's great, and more Maronites should support that cause. But when I asked him about, that, he was just very bitter towards those people. Like, yeah, they bring it on themselves, they're idiots, kind of thing. Like this really disgusting attitude towards them, like not understanding the complex issue that brings countries like that to need charitable assistance, like Lebanon, for goodness sakes, right? The BEIRUT blasts, right? And the civil war, right? Jesus. I mean, yeah, they really can't see the plank in their own eye. I mean, Lebanon doesn't even have electricity for 24/7. Most third world countries do. It's quite appalling. Mind you, get this for like third world gross, right? If you do a number 2 in Lebanon, right, in our village, you have to you wipe your ass, fold that tissue, and put it in a bin next to the toilet, right? So you literally have mounds of shit in a bin in every toilet in Lebanon, pretty much, or most of the toilets in Lebanon, because they didn't use the right pipes. The pipes aren't big enough, right? Because they're all geniuses and they're all licensed plumbers. Jesus. So if you flush, you can't flush. The toilet paper can't flush. It blocks the pipe, because that's how excellent their infrastructure is. It's very first world, first rate sort of stuff. It is pathetic in a way, but they're fantastic. I think a lot of houses have updated plumbing, and so they can. And for me, I just don't do that because I think it's just gross. So I just flush it, and then, I've actually never had a problem. I always flush the toilet, the toilet paper in the toilet, and it's fine. But yeah, you get locals and normals, literally wiping their ass and putting the shit-filled toilet paper in a bag next to the toilet. It's lovely, isn't it? And then only electricity for half of the day. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? But Lebanon's amazing, and I love it. And the things that contribute to the poor infrastructure is very, very complex, right? It has to do with poor government, a failure of leadership, right? The devastation of the Civil War. And that's why, the plumbing is poor and the electricity doesn't work. And I'm pretty sure Hezbollah had the portfolio for power, right? So obviously that was never going to get fixed. Lebanon had terrorists in government, for goodness sakes, right? So yeah, we shouldn't be so judgmental. And on that note, the UWET, right, the Christian Lebanese militia, which aren't really a militia anymore, the Christian Northern Lebanese Party, has got the portfolio for power. So, and they've made it their guarantee or whatever. I don't know what the word is, but they've said that they will have power to Lebanon for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, very shortly. And I am hopeful that will happen, right? And I'm fully supportive of the UWET. Samir Jaja, man, he's a bit of a hero of mine. Amazing figure. A failure, 100%, right? But Jesus Christ was a failure. Look at him getting crucified, and he didn't have to. And Samir Jaja, didn't have to go to jail in Syria. He almost kind of like laid on his sword for the greater good of his country. I really admire him for that, Yeah. Okay. I better get moving. I want to talk about this narrow-mindedness, right, in the Lebanese Maronite culture, because I am kind of sick of it, right? Or I'm sickened by it, and I always have been. I've always been repulsed by it, repelled by it, annoyed by it, right? And I'm at a point where, because I have this platform, right, I might as well just talk about it. Maybe I'll feel better. Maybe someone will comment on this video and say, look, Andrew, your approach to it is wrong, right? This is what you should, really be focusing on. It's not fair of you to characterize your uncle this way. It's not fair of you to characterize Lebanon that way, I don't know. But I see this sort of narrow-minded silliness sort of everywhere, right? And I have this podcast that I absolutely adore. I hate watch it, right? Because I love to, I don't know, man. I suppose part of me is a cynic. I don't know, but no, it's not, because even in my cynicism, I'm sort of hopeful, right? Because there's this podcast that I hate watch and I hate love, right? Called Stand for Truth podcast, right? Whose host is Charlie Bachos, right? A person that I think is quick to anger, right? Promotes violence, doesn't promote violence, but doesn't do enough to quell the violence, the inherent violent nature of a lot of Lebanese Maronites, right? Which is inherited from the Civil War and from the normalization of domestic violence, right? They glorify this sort of toxic kind of masculinity, right? And push back on me for this whole notion of toxic masculinity. Call me a little bitch, call me gay, whatever, right? But I think that, like, people to get so upset at an artwork that they like threaten violence is kind of weak and pathetic, right? I think I have this thing about the whole abortion debate, right? And the new law reform bill, right? The amendment to the abortion law that basically makes abortions more accessible, right? Now, I'm a contrarian, right? So if Charlie is angry at something, right? And, oh my God, and it's like this almost like trigger. If Charlie says persecuted, right? If he personally, Charlie, living in Australia, right, the best country in the world, right, feels persecuted in Sydney, Australia from a painting, right? Whenever he uses the word persecuted, right, first it's paintings, then it's a photo of an Indigenous Australian play acting, spearing Christ, right? And now it's a law reform bill. He gets persecuted. He's so persecuted. He's so sensitive, for goodness sakes, right? I just have this immediate thing like, you're an idiot, stop saying you're persecuted, because you're not, you spoiled moron, right? He was a gambler that started praying, and then the community gave him $5 million to give to Lebanon, and now he's got a successful podcast where he's got 15 sponsors. Where's the persecution, right? Him spreading awareness for the persecution, for the actual persecution of Christians in Syria is fantastic and good, and I fully support that. Him talking about the evils of abortion, right, or the immoral aspect of abortion is good, right? But him saying that him personally is persecuted, that Christians are persecuted, all right, because of a law reform bill, all right, that creates, that increases access for women to have abortion, right? It's not him being persecuted, and that's not the Catholic Church being persecuted. And I'll tell you why, right? Because I actually emailed the author of the reform bill, and I'll just read you the email, right, that she sent back to me, because I think it's really interesting. Now, I don't agree with abortion, right? I'm a conscientious objector, for goodness sakes, okay? But Christian churches, Christian hospitals are not going to be closed down because of this law reform bill, just full stop, right? And conscientious objectors are not going to be forced to perform abortions, okay? Places won't be closed down, okay? There are particular implications, I suppose, down the line but they're protesting it, right? And good on them. They should protest, right? Because protesting is worthwhile, right? But I emailed Amanda Cohen, all right? She's a minister for the Greens, and she seems lovely. She's really lovely. All right, so she says, well, actually not her, I should say her communications and campaign advisor, Josh Appleton. He, him, oh God, that'll piss off the Maronites, the Lebos. Hi, Andrew. Thanks for getting in touch with Amanda and your approach to this. Here's a response to some of the concerns we've heard about the contents of the bill. You can attribute this to Dr. Amanda Cohen, MLC, Greens spokesperson for health and former GP. So she's a former GP. She's for the Greens. She's a doctor, for goodness sakes, right? She's lovely. She seems really lovely, like more lovely than Charlie Bachos, right, who promotes violence in his community in the name of God. Quote, the bill does not force all hospitals nor all health professionals to provide abortions. There is no intent nor any mechanism for Catholic hospitals to be forced to close, right? The TGA has permitted nurse practitioners and endorsed midwives to prescribe abortion medications up to 9 weeks gestation since 2023, and this is occurring safely in Queensland and the ACT. Allowing them to also prescribe abortion medication in New South Wales is recommended by New South Wales Health, okay? And prescribed abortion medication. So I think that's like the morning after pill and that, right? Which is, it's easier for me, like, conscientious objection for me applies like after 12 weeks, right? I've got 4 kids. I understand the gestational period, man. Anything after 12 weeks, man, that's just harrowing, right? To have to abort that, okay? Individual doctors, nurses, and midwives would still be able to exercise a conscientious objection to providing abortion, so they don't have to provide it, right? Practitioners with a conscientious objection would be required, and this is controversial. I agree with you, Charlie Bachos, Stand for Truth, and the conservative Lebanese Maronite community. I get you, all good. Practitioners with conscientious objections would be required to refer patients to access abortion, which already occurs in Victorian legislation, right? So they're already persecuting people in Victoria, right? And Victoria is way more progressive than New South Wales. The current mandatory data collection requirements were found to be functioning as intended by New South Wales Health Statutory Review of the Abortion Law Reform Act, which was published earlier this year, and this is why they need to change. Okay. All right, so just calm down, protest, don't firebomb, don't be violent, right? Don't call women who have abortions murderers, don't compare abortions to the Holocaust, for goodness sakes, man. Just be cautious with your rhetoric, because if you want to actually change legislation, you just have to be better at speaking well and being more informed about the issue and speak from the heart, not from your ego, okay? Not from your anger, right? Like a guy, Charlie Bachos, right, getting so wound up, right, about the issue. Get a Lebanese Maronite midwife to talk about the issue, for goodness sakes, right? Talk about harrowing examples of fetuses being aborted, right, with beating hearts, right? Right? There's language that you can use, there's stories that you can tell, right, that can compel people and can sort of push the message in to something that's more agreeable for you, right? That could be better for you, be better for the Lebanese Maronite conservative cause, right? To reduce the amount of abortions, right? To affect actual positive change, right? This whole idea that Christians are being persecuted, right, because of this law reform bill is dumb, okay, and ignorant. And speaking of dumb and ignorant, I want to talk to you about Father Ben from the Lebanese Maronite Church, who's talking to Charlie Bachos about yoga, all right? I saw this podcast and I absolutely adored it. I love it from the bottom of my heart. And this father seems really, really, really okay, you know. And they're talking about yoga, and I'm gonna kind of do my commentary on it, and then we'll just sort of go from there, right? So Charlie Bacchus wants to ask a Lebanese Maronite priest about the morality of yoga. Awesome, right? Two men that know a lot about this subject, you know.
Very controversial.
Can we talk about this one?
Of course we can. Of course we can.
Because I hear it all the time that I'm Christian, I do yoga, it's just for more exercise, and I'm only doing the breathing exercises, I'm not doing it as a spiritual thing. I know how bad it can be, but again...
I know how bad it could be for Christians who do yoga and do breathing exercises. How bad it can be. The reason why that annoys me is because I had a nervous breakdown, right, last year, and I was struggling with mania. Things like yoga and meditation would have been great for me. You know what I mean? These are good things that people can practice alongside their religion, and I could tell you why, okay? But let's, you know, continue this sort of like toxic talk about things that they know nothing about.
People will say, who are you, Charlie? You know, I'm a Christian myself, I'm a Catholic, and I do yoga, and it makes me feel good. What's the church's stance on yoga, and how do you explain this to people at home that maybe, sorry if I'm offending anybody, but if they're doing yoga, what's your the church's opinion on it?
Okay, so Father Ben is not the church. Father Ben is a father, okay? He's a priest from our church in a area in Sydney, Australia, in the world, in the universe, okay? He doesn't represent the church, okay? But he's got an opinion, right? And his opinion isn't invalid, okay? It's just, we'll see what it is.
Yeah, well look, we need to understand firstly what yoga is. Yoga has become extremely commercialized. It's become almost a pastime, a hobby for many men and women. And most of them will just look at it as a bunch of stretches. But if you actually want to respect yoga and its traditions, then there's no way to formally Christianize it.
Okay, so he's saying we have to understand what yoga is, and then proceeds to not explain what yoga is. He just says what yoga is not, right? Or rather, he says that yoga is just commercialized. So he doesn't state what it is. He just says that whatever it is, it's highly commercialized, right? Which is, you know, very insightful.
Baptize it, as we might say, and make it holy.
I've never heard of Christian yoga. I've heard of
Yeah. It's out there. It exists.
So, a priest in a church is giving us his opinion on yoga, right? And both of them know that there's Christians out there that practice the two together, that have found some way to merge the two, right? And they just dismiss it out of hand as something laughable and silly, which, you know, is annoying.
There will be many people that fly the flag for all of this, but ultimately at its core, yoga encourages what we call monism, which is basically I am one with everything. An enlightenment is, I think, what their goal is at the end of the day.
Yoga promotes this oneness, monism, right? And by the way, I don't know because I'm not an expert, okay? But he's still not saying what yoga is, and then now he's giving his opinion on what he thinks, not what he knows, not what the research has told him, not what his experience in yoga has taught him, because he hasn't experienced it before. I'm assuming he hasn't spoken to a practitioner of it, right? This is just his opinion, right? His very narrow-minded, small opinion, okay? And it doesn't matter.
And the way they achieve that is through the breathing and the poses and and the mantras that they pray. Now, the Christian that does yoga and is enthusiastic about yoga will say, well, I don't do the mantras.
Yeah, they say that all the time.
Yeah, I don't do anything like this.
Your mantra can be very, very, very Christian, right? When I was struggling with mania, all right, when I was struggling to get grips on reality, right? And I didn't do any of the research, all right? I didn't do anything, right? But one of my friends practiced meditation, right? And I just found that just breathing, right? Calmly breathing and praying to Jesus Christ, right? Both our Lord and Savior in it, right? Helped me get through a panic attack, right? And then whenever I felt like I was losing touch with reality, right? And I was spiraling, right? I had particular mantras, right? About God, Jesus, my sons, right? That really prevented me from spiraling, right? I believe, my opinion, right? Andrews Clubhouse, from the Institute of Andrews Clubhouse, right? Believe that yoga, meditation, stretching, okay, and mantras, all right, can be very Christian, can bring you closer to Jesus Christ, not God, not oneness, right? But you know, and by the way, if you want it to be oneness, it can be oneness. Be oneness, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But you can certainly merge the two, okay? Just like how Christmas, right? Lebanese Maronite, you know your Christmas tree? Do you know the ornament? Do you know that time of the year? Right? It's a pagan festival, right? That celebrates Saturnalia. I forgot the specific word, but Christmas, okay, grew out of an evolution of a pagan festival, for goodness sakes, right? So, you know, celebrating Christmas, right, with Christmas trees and gifts, okay, is by his own kind of rationale, devil worship or demonic, for goodness sakes, right?
But we have to understand that posture matters.
Posture does matter.
Posture is important. So
God.
if a person might be innocently walking into a yoga class, you might not be participating in what maybe the yoga teacher is saying, but the yoga teacher is saying something, and then you're entering into a particular stretch or pose that has its roots in a deep tradition of something that is not Christian.
Yeah, like pagan festivals.
So we have to be very mindful of that. Okay, you can stretch. Okay, you can pull out the massage gun. You can do all sorts of things.
I'm glad that Father Ben gives us his consent to stretch and pull out yoga guns. I was really worried.
And I don't mean to make light of it.
He's not making light of it. He's just being extremely narrow-minded, right? And he's turning people away from the faith with such ignorant kind of views of something that could be quite positive, right? And healing for people.
At the end of the day, its foundations are not in Christianity. And at the end of the day, if you were to speak to traditional yogis, like the actual teachers and instructors, they would be highly offended that we've almost commercialized.
This is called the straw man argument, right? What yogis is he talking about? All right, who are offended? How many has he talked to? What the hell is he talking about? I'd imagine that a lot of yogis will be quite flattered that Christians have found a way to sort of merge the two. All right, I actually got I watched the video where a yogi had a really, really thoughtful response to people that feel that yoga is demonic, right? It was a really, really lovely response as part of a video on a pastor talking about, you know, the evils of yoga. And I think I'll feature it here.
So there's a conversation about the exclusivity of Christianity. And I think Christianity is pretty clear that it is the only way. Jesus taught this, that I'm the only way to the Father. No one comes to the Father except through me. The apostles preached there's no other name under heaven by which men shall be saved other than Jesus. So that's a pretty clear conversation. And so that would lead to a conversation about Hindu ideas versus Christian ideas, and where those things clash. And reincarnation is certainly one of those things. Views of God, one God versus many. All of that is an important conversation. Then there's the question of yoga and Harry Potter and these kind of things, which is a second kind of piece of this conversation. So the first one, I think Christianity is pretty clear. It's like Jesus is the only way. Now we're in a conversation with world religions. What about Judaism? What about Islam? What about Hinduism? What about Buddhism? Can do you go to heaven if you believe those things? And the New Testament's pretty clear. Jesus is the only way. And then there's this question about the practice and methodology of yoga, or depending on your version of it, how far you go with it, I would think would be the Christian response, because there's a certain aspect of society that looks at it as stretching. There's certain stretches that you do in order to be healthy, in order to keep your body healthy. And I always think of the story in these conversations in 2 Kings, where you have this guy who is part of this other religion, and he comes to know God, the God of Israel, and he has to go in with the people because he's a servant of one of the pagan guys, and he has to go in to the temple and do this thing with them. And he's like, is it okay if I go? He asked the prophet of Israel, is it okay if I go and do this as long as I'm praying to Yahweh? And the answer is yes. And there's this piece where there's certain methodologies that Christianity's point is to redeem things. And I think there's versions of this, where you take stretches. One of the neglected things in Christianity in the West over the last couple hundred years has been spiritual practices. If you go read Richard Foster's books, Celebration of Discipline, or you read Dallas Willard or other spiritual writers, they talk about the idea of meditation is actually a Christian discipline. If you go back and read so many different segments of Christianity for the last 2,000 years, meditation and prayer and solitude have been massive ways Christians have focused in actually connecting with Jesus. It's just a matter of filling your mind and your heart with reflections on Christ as you literally meditate. Meditation is a thing. It's not to be hijacked as meditation is by definition belongs to Eastern, ideologies and religions and things that aren't Christianity. And that's why Christians stay away from it, because they don't want to be seen as people who meditate. But it's like literally been a part of Christian history. What are you actually filling that time with? Christianity has this beautiful ethic of redeeming the things of the world for the sake of Christ. And, people say these same arguments about, Christmas trees, and, we shouldn't use Christmas trees. And, Easter was a pagan festival. It's like, yeah. And then Christianity came along and redeemed them into this beautiful thing.
All right. So let's continue.
Because, again, it's not Christian.
Is it Hindu or Buddhist? Or
Hindu, I believe. Okay. Yeah. But there are many forms of yoga.
Okay.
Many forms of yoga with many mantras.
There are many forms of yoga. Some of them can be Christian yoga. And perhaps they don't even have to call it Christian yoga. They can, these two things can evolve with each other, and they can merge. Yoga and stretching can be something that's quite religious, right? You can pray as you stretch, for goodness sake. Stretching is fantastic for your muscles, right? For your well-being. There's nothing wrong with it. There's a way to merge the two. This is just ignorant, closed-minded thinking from a priest whose parish has created a devil-worshipping priest, for goodness sakes, right? So for goodness sakes, man, the hypocrisy here is incredible, because in this episode they mention how there's a priest in my local parish that has been reprimanded or investigated for devil worshipping. Okay? What do they say about that? Well, I know what they say about that. It's horrid, and they don't want to talk about it because, again, they don't want to focus in the plank in their own eye in this divine Lenten season.
Now, the majority of people that do yoga as their Sunday obligation is ridiculous. It's
a lot,
in our country, in the country we live in.
It's a straw man. Who does yoga as their Sunday obligation? Who in the world? Who in Father Ben's head, right? His bigoted head, his big bigoted head, his overweight bigoted head. Yeah, he should do some yoga. Does he think that people, Maronite Catholics, because we're just talking about Maronite Catholics, I can't speak to anyone else, right? But who in his straw man head, who in his head is he straw manning to think that instead of going to church, someone's doing yoga? Like who and why? And if they're going to talk about that, give specifics and talk about that specifically.
In Australia, Sunday is about, the long walk, the yoga session, the chilling out at the pub with the mates and all that kind of thing for the community that doesn't believe in God, ultimately.
Now, I think that chilling out with mates, having beers on a Sunday, going for long walks and yoga is better than going to a local parish where the priest is a devil worshipper in it.
So it's become so much of an industry that people make money out of it now. Yoga's become something that is almost like a hybrid with other forms of stretching. It's become so commercialized that it's almost, I believe it's disrespectful to the original yogis and to their practices. Mm-hmm. Because we wouldn't like it very much if they took our mass, for example,
and made it into
something, and made it something different where they made it a hybrid of something else. So, look, I've got great respect. You have what you have, but don't bring it into our religion and say that, it's okay. Now, there'll be many people out there that will disagree with what I've just said, but I always say,
I do.
We have our Lord, we have our tradition of prayer, we're in the winning team. No need to mix things up and get fancy with it.
He's in the winning team where the overwhelming majority of his parishioners normalize domestic violence, drug abuse, and significant mental health, and their priests are devil worshippers, and forget about Maronites, but Catholics only represent 47% of the population, right? And has been declining in it. But apparently it's come back up, which I fully support, but he's not part of the winning team, and these thoughts isn't the winning team, right? This isn't indicative of a winning team, for goodness sakes, right? I've got a bigger following than Stand for Truth podcast, and I started it during my nervous breakdown, for goodness sakes.
We have what we need.
But I have these conversations when you say there's a lot of people who disagree with what we're saying. I have these conversations with the Christians that disagree with what we're saying. Yeah. So that's the biggest problem.
I'm a Christian that disagrees with what he's saying, but I still love both of them. I want to, love, hug, and pray with both of them if they'd have me, but I don't think they'd have me. I think they're still upset at me for having a manic episode all over my local parish. Ugh, I found it quite inconvenient.
Watching, and they realise that what you're saying is the truth, and they've been doing yoga for 20 years. What do they do?
Mind you, nothing that Father Ben said was true or false. He was just talking about his opinion, for goodness sakes. Like, what was he saying, right? That's true, right? Nothing. I suppose yoga has become highly commercialized, but I don't even think that that's true. I don't think there was any true statement in this clip.
Do they go to confession?
They can just stop.
Okay.
And they can think about what they've been doing, and they can read into it. Not many people will read into what they've been doing or its origins. I mean, same thing in our faith.
I'm going to post a clip to a pastor reacting to people believing that yoga is sinful and bad in this clip, because I think that's really important. People that have been doing yoga for 20 years and are finding it super beneficial, don't stop. Continue doing it. Perhaps reflect, maybe. And if you think that there are components of it that's taking you away from your faith, and you feel that you have this deep sort of faith that you want to sort of nurture, and you think that maybe yoga might take you away from it, perhaps reflect on that, but don't stop, okay? If it's doing you good, for goodness sakes, right?
Think about our faith and how little people know about our faith. but they get into it and they live their faith the way they think they should live their faith. And 20 years later, they might come back and say, I didn't know this was one of the things that you can't do as a Christian. And now they realize, okay, now you realize it, repent, stop.
What the fuck is he talking about? What do you mean? Yoga is one of the things that you can't do as a Christian. Why? What particular component of it are you engaging in that is sinful and requires you to stop? This kid is on shabs.
And move forward. And life will go on. But the whole practice of yoga.
Why? What's the reason? What's the reason that he's given? Like, he hasn't given any reason. Yoga's highly commercialized. Monism, I don't know what the hell that is, promotes this oneness and unity with God. Is that why? Really? That's it? What? When I pray, I feel at one with Jesus. What are you talking about, you idiot? What do you mean by God? Who's your God? What if Jesus is your God? The Trinity. Okay. Don't stop. It's not a sin. The fact that he thinks he's making a point is laughable and stupid, but I love him. He's lovely. I'll pray for him in it.
Is a sensitive one to a lot of people because of some of its proven health benefits.
Okay, that's where it gets tricky.
And that's when it becomes tricky. Are you saying you don't want me to be healthy? Mm-hmm. Of course I want you to be healthy.
So he's conceding that there is proven health benefits.
The roots of what you're participating in. Mm-hmm. And not a lot of people understand or know the roots of what they're participating in.
Okay.
Because it's become so...
Understand the roots of what you're participating in, still participate in them. There's a way for you to merge the two, all right? There's nothing wrong with that, okay? Christianity has grown and borrowed from so many other different religions and faiths and cultures, for goodness sakes, right? That in and of itself isn't any reason for you to stop participating in yoga, okay? It just isn't, all right? This priest, I understand he's passionate and I get it. I get that he thinks he's right, but I also understand how stubborn Maronite Catholics are and how wrong-headed they can be, all right? And this is a perfect example of it, all right? This is a narrow-minded, conservative view and this really unhealthy fear of the other and other cultures, right? It is disgraceful in a way. Anyway, I don't agree with it.
It's harmless because I walk in, I've got a 1 hour lunch break during the week. Yeah. I go and do my half an hour yoga session at the studio down the road and it's all good, no problem. I feel great about myself, come back to work. I can do the rest of the afternoon and then on Sunday I go to mass. I can balance everything. But we need to again understand the posture, the pose, the consent.
That scene that he describes sounds heavenly. How lovely is that? You can fit in a yoga session, a gym session, right? A lovely self-care session for an hour and then go to church and everything is fine and happy, and he's going to undermine that because of some narrow-minded, dumb view of something that he doesn't even understand.
I'm going to do this. Now, whether you are inviting things or not, you are basically, when you're doing that pose, you're participating in a pose that's been done for hundreds of years, and all the way like back to ancients. And when they were doing those poses, they were, what's the word I'm looking for? They weren't calling on deities, but those poses actually meant something.
Like the ancient pagan religions, right, that Christmas sprang up from, okay? You know, Santa Claus, God, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Look, this guy, look, yoga's fine, okay? If it's giving you health benefits, right? If you're engaging in those postures, right? and you receive physical and mental benefits from it, continue to do it, okay? Don't worry what Father Ben says. Don't freak out, okay? You'll be okay. Everything will be okay. I think that's enough for that. Oh. All right. Hui. Is that it? Is that a long one? I don't even know. I made notes. I tried to structure this as best as I can, because this is kind of like the penultimate episode, and then episode 100 is going to be, I don't know, an important one for me, I suppose. I really enjoyed making it. I really enjoyed making this episode. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something about me, about my story, and about my community. You know what I mean? And you know, I hope you're slightly better for it. If there's anything that I said that you disagree with, you feel free to comment. You know, I reply to all my comments. I want to learn. I want to understand, right? And I want to impart as best I can in it, right? I hope you've learned something. I hope my audience can teach me something, right? So please, like, subscribe, give me a comment. And yeah, I love you so much. Thank you so much for watching. All right. Bye. Ugh. That was fun.
My brother was a heroin addict for over 22 years in and out of jail, and now lives in Qatar. That's Andrews Clubhouse.